Words of Joy and Hope. It is the third Sunday of Advent, the year C,
Dal Vangelo
and the Gospel is from Luke chapter 3, verse 10 to 18. The commentary is by Father Fernando Armelini. A good Sunday to all. Last Sunday we listened to the Baptist who preached a baptism of conversion. To convert means turning the scale of values upside down. What guides our life completely upside down. If at the top we had money, career, success, and then a little lower family, and then faith, the gospel, provided we have time, naturally, to convert means turning around the scale of values. That is why it is important to search for the meaning of life, the knowledge of Christ, then all the other values which are important, including money, but they have to be in the right place. Our temptation is to invert this scale of values, and to convert is to become aware of what is really important. What is the most important thing? The Baptist continues his preaching saying, produce fruits worthy of conversion. That is, the first thing is to change your mind, your head, put the proper order in your mind. Then the consequences is needed. The fruits of this change, of this conversion. And today, the Baptists explain what are the fruits as a result from this conversion. They are fruits, plural, that indicate when the presence of this conversion is really authentic. And three categories, group of people approach the Baptists to know what they should do. These three groups of people ask the same question. The first group is that of the crowd, who asks, what should we do? Let us listen. The crowds asked John the Baptist, what should we do? He said to them in reply, whoever has 2 cloaks should share with the person who has none, and whoever has food should do likewise. This also applies to all of us. For example, when we listen to some reflections on the gospel and it bothers us. Previously, we were calm, happy with our religious practices. We thought we were up to date with God. Then we realized something else. And we ask ourselves, if I take seriously what Jesus says, the options of my life are challenged. Previously, I felt comfortable with my quiet way of living, with my prayers, with my devotions. But now the gospel is asking me for something very challenging. In fact, Jesus is very demanding. The encounter with Christ and with his gospel always provokes a disorder in the mind and in the heart. If we are open to the light of the Spirit. And then the question spontaneously appears. So, what should I do? Do I take seriously what Jesus asks, or I continue with my life, which is not that bad? It is going to be a limited follow-up though. The moral conversion, that is, the change of life, only comes after the change of mind and heart. First you have to create convictions. Then the motivating and convincing options are made. This question that the crowd puts to the Baptist appears several times in the New Testament. For example, when after the Passover, Peter says to the crowd, you did not receive the Messiah. You have committed a crime. You have condemned and executed the Messiah of God. And the crowd asks, so, what should we do? Then also Paul, once converted, he says, Lord, what should I do? This is the question that we must also ask ourselves. If we are determined to follow the proposed options of Jesus of Nazareth, we put this question in front of our concrete options. What should I do? If we want Christ to enter our life, and we are these days in the time of waiting, of reflection, to be able to really let Jesus enter our history before Christmas. Christmas is not a sentimental celebration with lots of emotion, music, lights. Well, those things are okay. But letting Christ into our lives is something that disturbs. It gives us a little fear. Let us keep in mind that if He comes in our life, it is only to bring us joy, the fulfillment of our life. This is the reason why He comes into our life. Let us try now to take it seriously with the answer that the Baptist gives to the crowd. Whoever has 2 cloaks should share with the person who has none, and whoever has food should do likewise. The first request that the Baptist makes is that we also have to do, if we really want Jesus to come into our life, is detachment from the goods of this world. They are important, but you have to leave them in their place. We must be critical of the instinct that leads us to accumulate, to monopolize the goods of this world as we never have enough, to think about ourselves, to forget about those who really need it. This is our instinct. The Baptist asks us to master this instinct and share with those in need, and therefore, if we have 2 cloaks, give one to someone who does not have. This is the first fruit of conversion. Otherwise, we have not been converted. I think that if today the people would have addressed us, Christians, with the same questions, what should I do to be a good Christian so that the gospel penetrates my life? I think many of us could give good suggestions. For example, okay, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not cheat. But the Baptist does not recommend avoiding these sins. He speaks of a sin we often forget, the sin of omission. Therefore, according to the Baptist, to convert means to stop committing this sin of omission. The letter from James says, if you know how to do good and you do not do it, it is a sin. And the first letter of John in chapter 3 says, if anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? This is the sin of omission. If a brother or sister is in need and I look the other way, it is not the right thing. What am I called to do? John says, dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and the truth. That is in 1 John 3:18. The Baptist does not propose an ideal of renunciations of poverty for a hero to practice and retire to a convent, but it is the proposal to prepare to enter a new society, a society where people do not accumulate, a society that does not monopolize the goods of this world, and one that is attentive to the needs of the brothers and sisters. This is the meaning of sharing. keep in mind that the goods of this world are for all the sons and daughters of God. Love of neighbor leads us to keep only what is necessary and nothing else. What the Baptist suggests to the crowd is provocative. The old justice was to give each one his own. One could retain what one has achieved with his own capacity for himself, be it much or little. This justice is over. The justice of God has a prior condition, the fatherhood of God who wants all his sons and daughters to be happy, to have a decent life. This is the consequence of the fatherhood of God, fraternity among all. Any kind of accumulation more than what is necessary is a robbery to the brother or sister who needs it. Therefore, we must pay attention to this call to avoid the sin of omission, not doing the good that you know you can and should do. This is the first requirement if you want to accept the Messiah of God. Otherwise, we will accept other messiahs that are of our liking. So let us take heed of the answer the Baptist gives to the question the people ask him. Let us now listen to what the Baptist suggests to the second group. Even the tax collectors came to be baptized, and they said to him, "Teacher, what should we do?" He answered them, "Stop collecting more than what is prescribed." Those in charge with collecting taxes were not well seen in Israel. The publicans were the people most unpopular in Israel, not only because of their profession, that they did not inspire any sympathy, but by the way they exercised it. The reason is that the payment of taxes was done with a contract, an established sum, which was to be presented to the Roman administration by the tax collector. The rest was the commission of this publican, and then it is easy to guess the traps, the subterfuges, the abuses of power. And to have an idea, it is enough to read what Cicero says against the theft of Gaius Verres during the 3 years he was governor of Sicily. And then we can understand very well what was going on in the time of Jesus. Also, the publicans were not accepted because they were the collaborators with the oppressive system, and especially were considered the renegades, because when they had to deliver their collections, as stipulated by the contract by the authorities, they had to worship and offer a sacrifice to the emperor God. These people present themselves to the Baptist and ask him, "We, who have this profession, what should we do?" I think we would expect the Baptist to force them to ask them to change their profession, but no. Because it is necessary to pay taxes, and someone is required to take charge of it. Taxes are paid, whatever the current political or economic system. So, what does the Baptist ask of them? He tells them, work differently in this profession. It does not impose on them to flee the world and to lead an ascetic life as he does in the desert. He tells them that this profession that they have can be done differently. And in fact, it applies to any profession. This is the reflection that we can do as we prepare to receive Christ in our life. We all have a profession that can be carried out in several ways. The same service, be it teaching, and nurses, the doorman at a building, anything. It can be done with a professional competence, very coherent, of course, but this is not enough. The smile, the kindness, the affability with the people to whom a service is given, do not enter a professional contract, but they are part of the new way of carrying out their own profession. One thing is to be strict in the observance of the contract, and another thing is to do it with attention, feeling like a servant of the brothers and sisters. So if we want to receive Christ in our life, this is the new way to do it, as a service to the brothers and sisters. Let us now listen to the Baptist suggestions to the third group. Soldiers also asked him, "And what is it that we should do?" He told them, "Do not practice extortion. Do not falsely accuse anyone, and be satisfied with your wages." The third group are of soldiers. And us, what should we do? We would expect that the Baptists tell these mercenaries of Herod, "Lay down your arms." But the Baptist has in mind and knows that the situation is not that of a time of war, but a time of peace. There is no looting, bloodshed, and the soldiers must maintain order only, prevent violence, and therefore the salaries for them are necessary. So what is the danger? To exercise this service from a position of strength, to abuse one's own power. They have weapons at hand, therefore they can raise their voices, offend, they can intimidate, abuse people. The Baptist recommendation is also valid for all those who are tempted today of abusing their position. It can be a social position or a position in a certain activity. They can abuse their power. The Baptist tells them, do not mistreat others. The Greek word and the Greek verb is diaseizo, which means to shake, to extract. It can also happen to us that we do not have the sword in hand, but when we have a little power, we can abuse it. This cannot be done in the new world if we truly want that Christ and his gospel enter our life. Second recommendation, do not resort to intimidation, to denounce falsely. Do not make blackmail. And the third request, be satisfied with your wages. The danger is to abuse the weapons and therefore not be satisfied with the salary and look for something extra that they can get with the people with whom they are in contact. Notice that the Baptist does not ask any one of these groups for a religious practice. He has asked for the conversion of the mind that at once calls to a change of life in the relationship with the brothers and sisters. And prayer helps us to assimilate the gospel message, to then put into practice this light that has been received, accepting and listening to the word of the Master. These people were also expecting something. Let's listen. Now the people were filled with expectation, and all were asking in their hearts whether John might be the Christ. John answered them, saying, I am baptizing you with water, but one mightier than I is coming. I am not worthy to loosen the thongs of his sandals. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. His winnowing fan is in his hand to clear his threshing floor and to gather the wheat into his barn. But the chaff will be burned with unquenchable fire. Exhorting them in many other ways, he preached the good news to the people. In Advent, we are waiting for the coming of the Lord. We are preparing to let in the gospel, to let Christ into our life. In the times of the Baptist, all the people were in expectation. What is it that they were expecting for? That the prophecies pronounced by their ancestors will finally be realized. When will the Lord begin the new world that has been promised? A change in the world as expected, the end of an ancient world and the beginning of a truly human world. Let us ask ourselves, what do we expect? If we let enter the gospel in our life, in our society, this new world will begin, will be realized. Let's try to ask, what do we expect from this Christmas? We certainly want peace, love, fraternity, all this. But how do we want this? We look forward to it with the realization of our criteria, of our ways, also imposed on others. In other words, this peace that we want must reach when we finally get to impose our way of thinking. But true peace can be obtained if we accept Jesus' proposal for a new world. This is the salvation that the person should seek, to be free of the instinct that prevent the realization of a humanity as God wants it. And John responds to all with three images that we need to understand well. The first thing he says is that there are two baptisms, one like his with water that cleans the exterior of the person, but he says there is one coming who brings a water that does not clean the external, but it becomes life within the person. As it happens with the plants, there is a water that cleans the plant from outside, but there is a water that becomes sap, that transforms into life, which then bears fruit. This is the comparison used by the Baptist. The Messiah will bring a water that will be transformed into life, into the sap of life. This water that Jesus brought to the world is the life of God, is the Spirit, is the life of love. It is the life of the Father in heaven that has to be shared with all the sons and daughters. When this life finally comes, it will create a new society and a new world. This is the first image used by the Baptist. The second is fire. This fire has been misunderstood. Fire that destroys sinners, that makes them suffer with punishment. Enough of all these. The only fire is the Spirit, the fire that descended on Pentecost, and whose mission is to burn all the evil that exists in the world, all the tares, so we can grow and become a new humanity. And Jesus speaks in the gospel of this fire that he came to bring into the world. I have come to bring fire on the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. Luke 12:49. We need to understand it well. when we think even in our own life, how many temptations, how many instincts that lead us to behaviors that dehumanize us. Well, Jesus came to bring this new fire to the world to burn this iniquity that is within us and that allows the divine life to be present concretely in our life. The third image is that of the winnowing fork. We know what the winnowing fork is used for. After picking the grain and to separate the grain from the straw, and they expected for a good wind, and they steered the grain and the straw in the wind, and the straw was thrown out, and only the good grain remained. What is the misunderstanding in the interpretation of this comparison? It was thought that the straw were the evil children of God, the bad men and women who were thrown out, burned, and then sent to hell. This is not so. This is a blasphemous interpretation. It is a wonderful news. With the coming of Christ, and for us, with the arrival of the gospel, this gospel acts like a wind that throws out all the straw and leaves only the good grain. We are preparing to receive this gospel because what we do at Christmas is not to celebrate a birthday, but to finally welcome Christ in our life. And when Christ comes with his word and his gospel, he acts like a pitchfork, like that wind that casts out all iniquity. If we really let in the gospel in our life, everything that makes us unhappy, that dehumanizes us, will be eliminated. Worse will end, because the hatred, the aggression will be eliminated by the fire that Jesus brought to the world. The concluding phrase with which the evangelist comments the message of the Baptist is very beautiful and very important, and belies any other terrifying interpretation of the text we have heard, that of fire, that of straw that is thrown out. Luke once, he says that the Baptist, with many other words, John exhorted the people and proclaimed the good news to them. What the Baptist has pronounced were not threats. They were words of consolation and hope. They were a gospel. They were good news. Let the gospel of Christ enter our lives. This is the great news. I wish everyone a good Sunday and a good week.